Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Massey College's ethics series entitled Parliamentary Ethics: Should Canadian MPs Be More Independent? My name is Sarah Maksoud, and I'm a junior fellow at Massey College, a recent graduate from the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, and currently an articling student. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territory on which we gather. We gather on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewas, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples. Today, this place remains home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. But regarding today's discussion explores the growing tension between members of Parliament and the centralization of power within the Prime Minister's office. And our moderator and panelists will explore that more in depth, but it is my pleasure to introduce them. Our moderator is Tom Axworthy, Public Policy Chair at Massey College, who previously served as Principal Secretary and Chief Speechwriter to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, and has spent decades working at the intersection of government, public policy, and academia. Joining us today also are Dennis Mills, a former member of Parliament, former assistant to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, a businessman, and an author of the recent memoir, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair. Sabrina Dellin also joins us today, Chief Executive Officer of the Samara Centre for Democracy, Senior Fellow at Massey College, and a host of the award-winning podcast, Humans of the House. And next we have Arvind Krishendal, Vanier Scholar, Junior Fellow at Massey College, and a PhD candidate studying public policy and Canadian politics here at the University of Toronto. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to a very engaging discussion. I will turn it over to Professor Axworthy now.
I got a mic. Well, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction, and welcome in the new year to our in-house audience at Massey College and the online audience. As Sarah has said, as we begin this new year, this is a profound time for democracy. There are many stresses. We see that to our neighbor to the south. We are experiencing some ourselves. So the subject matter today, parliamentary ethics, the role of members of Parliament, the role of our Parliament, is a very major and central question. And before beginning our questions, I just wanted to say two things about that. The first is that the issue is not new. When the first Legislative Assembly was established in Nova Scotia, 1758, almost from the first day, there were disputes between the executive, the governor, and the members of the Legislative Assembly. And so it continued through that broad sweep of Canadian history, Joseph Howe, Pierre Bedard, Baldwin and LaFontaine. So this issue is not new. But as we meet today, we have had, for example, two very serious commentators. Andrew Coyne has written a book, The Crisis of Canadian Democracy, where he thinks that the role of the Member of Parliament has been so degraded that he actually believes that our democracy is in peril because Parliament can no longer continue to have keep the executive accountable. That's a serious statement from a serious man. And equally, in a few months of Coyne's book being published, we had another important book by Kevin Lynch, who's the former Deputy Minister of Finance and Clerk of the Privy Council, one of the most senior public servants in recent times. And he has written a book called A New Blueprint for Canada, whose thesis is that the balance between Parliament, members of Parliament, and the non-elected members of the Prime Minister's office is out of balance, it's out of whack. There's far too much concentration, and this whole book is on the implications of that concentration. So we have two modern voices joining that historical trend or past. There's been a continuity of concern about this issue. So I want to begin first with Dennis Mills, former member of Parliament, and put a question to him to begin the discussion. And as Sarah has said, he has just written a memoir about his career in business, but also in politics. Many, many chapters devoted to his role as a member of Parliament. If we could think back to some of the points that you made in that book, Dennis, did you feel in your time as a member of Parliament that your independence was ever severely curtailed by the Prime Minister's office of Mr. Chrétien at the time, and your role as a member of Parliament? What made you tick as a member? What gave you the greatest satisfaction? So, were you independent in your own mind? Did you exercise that independence? And what did you come out of that important job?
Thank you, Tom. And I want to begin by saying I will always treasure the opportunity that you gave me to work in the Prime Minister's office. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life, and it laid a foundation that gave me the confidence that I could seek public office. So I want to begin by thanking you. Now, when I decided to run in 1987, our then leader was John Turner. And John Turner was, Prime Minister Mulroney, of course, was in charge. And the issue at that time was the Meech Lake Accord. And I went to John Turner and I said, look, I'm willing to run in a riding that had been NDP for 22 years, but I don't share your view on the Meech Lake Accord. I am a passionate national government, strong guy. And I said, I don't believe in decentralizing the national government. And I said, do you feel comfortable with me being on your team? And to John Turner's credit, he said, no problem, go for it. And he said, I believe that parliamentarians, unless it's a budget vote, should have the ability to speak their mind. So there's a very specific example of where you could have a view quite dramatically different from the leader. So in 1988, the big issue then, of course, was the Free Trade Agreement, which John Turner, as we think about things today, was so prescient in his knowledge of that contract and so far ahead of his time. And we didn't win, but I had 5 years in opposition. I was elected in '88. And my experience when I first came to the House of Commons is totally different from what it is today. We, at that time, all members of Parliament were in the House for 80% of the year. We had opportunities to speak on all the issues. There were votes sometimes that took us till 12, 1, 2 in the morning. But during that period, from '88 to '93 in opposition, we had a rapport with the government members. As a member of Parliament from a downtown riding, which was not financially advantaged, if I walked across the floor to the Minister of Immigration and said, hey, I need some help on this file, bang, they responded right away. He was the minister, I was in opposition, but the response was collaboration, cooperation for the sake of the country. It didn't bother him that he was helping me do my job as an MP. He responded. A couple of times I went to then Minister of Foreign Affairs Joe Clark on issues that needed attention from my riding. And again, the responsiveness was amazing. So I learned from my experience in opposition that we could constructively criticize the government, but if there were things that we agreed on, get behind them, but also never be afraid to walk across the floor and ask for help directly on behalf of your constituents, directly of the government. And I would credit Brian Mulroney on that point because I'm sure he had a view that it's much better to sort of collaborate with opposition members than trying to antagonize. So in '93, we were elected, And that was the GST election. And our then government whip was a gentleman by the name Bob from Cornwall. Give me the last name, Dan. And he said, I want you to sit on the finance committee because you've spent all this time in opposition on tax reform. And I said, I can't sit on the finance committee, Bob Kilgore, because I campaigned that we were going to do something with the GST, and I'm not convinced we are. And he says, well, you got to work. And I said, well, put me on Heritage or whatever. And I did sit as the vice chair of the Heritage Committee. And the reason I bring this up is because I never had a problem in expressing my point of view and feeling that I was going to get punished. And so now I've only got a minute left, but I do want to say, Tom, in answer to the last point you made, I love the House of Commons. I just could never, ever imagine to this day how anybody could have a better experience than sitting and working and speaking on behalf of not just your constituents, issues that serve the whole country. And this is what a lot of MPs don't understand today. Even though you're elected from a specific riding with specific needs, when you speak in the House of Commons, you're speaking on behalf of the whole country, and you should care about the whole country, and you should be listening to MPs from every part of the country. And I am so downtrodden right now because last year the House of Commons only sat 72 days. In the whole year, 72 days. The average over 20 years is 125, but that 72 days is the worst record in 80 years. And so we all want Carney, Prime Minister Carney, to succeed, but I passionately believe unless he reinvigorates and gives MPs the role of fully utilizing what their opportunity is, then I am very, very concerned, as Andrew Coyne and others are, about the way our democracy is going. Thank you.
So you mentioned, Dennis, how proud you were to sit in that green chair. Did they give you one when you left?
Well, not when I left, but what was our speaker, the previous speaker, not the current one, but Fergus, yeah. When I did the book, I wanted a green chair on the cover of my book, from the wood chair to the green chair. And he was classy enough that I got a green chair from the House of Commons.
There you go. Well, so, Sabrina, we've heard from Dennis from his time as an MP in the 80s and the 90s and 2000s about that he never felt unduly constrained and that he could work with the government when he was an opposition member, ask questions, and the picture he paints also in his book is of an activist MP, very much so. And the Samara Centre, which I can say to our audience, has done superlative work on Canadian democracy on many different fronts, but in particular, from the book The Tragedy of the Commons to that brilliant series, Humans on the Hill, where you interviewed 80 MPs or around that number, current folks, would they have the same answer as Dennis, that they could influence, that they didn't feel unduly constrained, or did you find more frustration and more angst in today's generation of MP?
So I'll just start with a bit of context about the Samara Centre for Democracy. So we're a nonpartisan charity, and we do research, we develop educational resources, we put on events, and also produce podcasts that are all aimed at strengthening Canadian democracy. We were co-founded by Michael McMillan and Alison Lote in 2007, and that was a time where concerns about Canada's democracy were almost considered quaint. And now that the foundation of our civic life has been shaken, our mission is much more readily understood and even more broadly appreciated. And our work is organized around three interconnected pillars. So we look at how technology is influencing our democracy, we look at youth civic engagement, and we also look at the lived experience of politics, largely through the MP Exit interview study, which, Tom, is what you were referencing. And so to date, we've collected over 160 exit interviews with former members of Parliament. Exit is used a little loosely. It's not the minute you're done the job or your last day on the job like it is in other sectors, but it's when you've had enough time to get some space from your time in the role and you're ready to share and reflect. And so our insights from those interviews have been published in books, including Tragedy in the Commons, which came out in 2014, various reports, and also in 2023, 2024, we shared audio of this, which was really exciting because it makes such a difference to be able to hear people's voices. But we published 2 podcasts, Humans of the House and Le Personnage de la Chambre. And so we currently have longitudinal analysis underway with these interviews where we conduct them on a rolling basis. And we have seen some shifts and trends, particularly within our last cohort of interviewees who served between 2015 and 2021. And certainly there are newer, deeper concerns around polarization, online toxicity and abuse, and a curtailing and restriction around the independence of MPs as well. And I should note that the outputs that we produce from this book are not just for politicos and keeners when it comes to talking about Canadian politics. This is material that is intentionally designed to be as accessible as possible to as anyone who's looking for a gateway into political conversations. So for Humans of the House, we were really thrilled to receive national media attention when we released the show. And it's had really great reception from different partners and colleagues, including Massey College. But what's really gratifying in particular to our team is that we worked with high school teachers across the country to develop curriculum-connected learning material based on the show, based on Humans of the House and the French companion, Le Personnage de la Chambre as well. So now the show is required listening. There's nothing like mandatory listening for high school students across the country. And it's also on a range of course outlines at universities across the country, because this is relevant in political science, but also history, Canadian studies, journalism. And you know, when you hear the voices of former MPs, many people are surprised at how forthcoming and candid and open they are, but they are passionate and are eager to share their challenges and their experiences to help evolve life in Parliament. And this matters because the experience of our MPs is an indicator of the health of our democracy more broadly, and it is also directly tied to the challenges that we're facing right now in terms of public trust. So we have seen a shift where the challenge and concerns around independence is a prominent theme in the analysis that has changed over time. But we've also seen an increase in polarization and hyperpartisanship, and this is accelerated largely by social media platforms.
Just to follow up, I mentioned in my intro, going back to Magna Carta and the first Parliament, 1265, and the Canadian experience, that holding the executive accountable was the essence, the primary initial essence of legislative assemblies. And we see when the executive is not held accountable, as Mr. Trump has said, I want to be king. Mm-hmm. In your interviews, though, and in your work now in Samara, I'd be interested in how do the MPs define their roles? Dennis talked about service, but also raising issues. I've talked about accountability. Is there consensus among the MPs you talked about what their job is about? How do they define their role?
There's lots of variation in how the role is defined, and that's a reflection of the various competing priorities that are inherent to the role. So you're stepping into the political arena because you want to make a change, because you view yourself as a capable and competent leader, a critical thinker. You also are going to be serving your constituents, and then you also have a party leader that you need to keep happy. And so those priorities can be in conflict sometimes, and that can make for a particularly arduous experience of work.
Good, thank you. Arvin, as a political scientist and a junior fellow here at Massey, I'm interested in your perspective on the questions that we've raised, looking a little bit at the Canadian past and present. In terms of members of Parliament today, as you have viewed them, do you see them as representative of the constituency and of differing groups? Are they bringing voices to government, or are they instead bringing the party message to the constituents? How do you and your colleagues view members of Parliament, if at all?
Well, I think Mr. Mills raises a very fascinating question. And the question that he raised was, do MPs realize that they're representing their own constituency, or are they representing the whole nation? And I bet if you do ask some current MPs, you might get differing views on that. So I think that's the first thing, is solidifying what exactly is the role of today's modern member of Parliament. Many scholars and political scientists and political science have commented since the 1920s, vote adherence was around 20%, roughly. That's in accordance with people voting according to the party line. Now that number has significantly increased. We are seeing very little autonomy being exercised by members of Parliament, and this is not new information. But I think some driving questions that fascinates students of public policy and political scientists is, why is this so strong in the Canadian context? Why in Canada, as opposed to other Westminster systems of democracy, do we see this emerging trend? And there's a couple of potential explanations to this. One probable one is the relations to trends in relation to historically entrenched norms that have been reestablished time and time again. For instance, in the United Kingdom, one fascinating institution that always makes me think about the strength and autonomy of members of Parliament is the 1922 Committee, a very strong backbencher conservative committee consisting of backbencher conservative MPs who really have a very strong driving force in terms of setting, instead of helping the autonomy of different MPs and different backbenchers. They were quite prominent when it comes to the fall of particular prime ministers, notably Theresa May, and thinking about, what are the current institutional challenges for aiding MPs, for them to be true, responsive representatives of their constituency is certainly a puzzling question. And I think we see a number of critical points in where the government has affirmed. For example, during the 2015 campaign, Prime Minister Trudeau did confirm that we are going to return to some form of cabinet government. Well, we know how that ended 1 year after. So we see these emerging trends and these emerging promises come up time and time again, yet we always seem to be stuck in this rut, right? We always seem to, no matter how many times we discuss this problem, it always seems to be very concerning. And what a very timely and topical discussion, considering where we are right now, 1 seat away from a majority government. So I anticipate right now that party loyalty and discipline must be quite strong right now, considering the fact that they would want to pull all their forces together and kind of toe the party line. One other important consideration that scholars have noted is the advent of social media. Social media has allowed politicians a direct microphone or megaphone to broadcast their personal opinions and public views. And many members of Parliament have noted that there have been very strong and rigorous messaging in terms of what politicians can say and cannot say, and how is this mediated over time. I first came to be of interest to this question when I started as a legislative page and I was 14. And I remember learning about all the different parliamentary rules and procedures.
Was that in Ontario?
Yes, that was in Ontario. And, David Zimmer was watching me at the time there when he was a...
He's right back there.
Yes, he's right back there.
He wants to see how his page is doing.
Yeah. And I was just so fascinated when it came to question period. The Liberal government was in power at the time. when the Liberal government had their turn to ask questions, they read off the script. And the answer was read off the script as well. And 13-year-old me was like, wow. I'm like, it was just such a fascinating experience, right? It really hammered home, back then, it was 2013, the strong importance of messaging, the importance of towing the party line, and what are the different considerations about that. So I'll leave my comments for there, but look forward to an interesting
But a follow-up question, I'm just interested, and then we'll have some interpanel discussion and then questions from our audience, which is that if political staffers or in the leader's office are writing out the questions and the answers, for all I know, it might be the same person doing both, and the MLAs or the MPs are reading scripts constantly, what does that say about independence, that they're not even thinking to formulate their own question or their own issue? I.e., is that the point that Lynch and others are making, that the balance has gone way too far for messaging and the party interest as opposed to the independence and thoughtful interest?
And I think you see that, I think it raises an important point, right? At the end of the day, what is the central autonomy of member of parliaments, right? And we do see more and more that as MPs deviate from normal messaging, there is added pressure. There is threats of potential being removed from the party altogether in most extreme and egregious cases. And I think this speaks to really, as Sabrina mentioned, a good indicator of the health of our democracy. To what extent are our locally elected officials actually true representatives of the constituents' concerns and messaging. And I think this stems from long-standing issues and issues that really, as many commentators have suggested, speaks to some challenges in terms of democratic erosion and thinking about some other questions as well.
Okay, so some follow-up points within the panel. By all means, any points you would like to raise, just give me a nod and I'll recognize you. But I wanted to start with Dennis again, because you put out a fairly astounding figure that the House, our current House, Parliament, is only meeting 2/3 or a half of the time that parliaments usually meet. Is this because we have no issues in the country, or they have? I mean, how could that be the case with the list of bills that we need passing, that Parliament's meeting less than it ever did, let alone the time of Sir John A?
Well, Tom, this is not a PMO-driven condition. I believe that members of Parliament today don't fully understand their role, that they don't really appreciate how much influence, if they utilized it, that they could have. I had dinner with a number of senior executives a couple of years ago, and I went around the table and I said, name your MP, name your MP. Not one of them could name their member of Parliament. But the second round I asked them, okay, name your lobbyist. And, oh, I've got 2 lobbyists. I know them. I talk to them all the time. And I said, well, that's the tragedy that we have in this country. The lobby culture of Canada, which is now registered, 10,000 lobbyists, has tsunamied the member of Parliament and has tsunamied the House of Commons to a point where I was watching CPAC a couple of weeks ago. It was a replay of a committee work, and the deputy minister there treated the members of Parliament, and I'm not just talking government members, opposition members, in such a dismissive, derogatory way. And these are deputy ministers that should know that those members of Parliament are board members in the nation's boardroom. And so I think that MPs today, there's always exceptions, don't really understand the role that they could and should be playing.
But I think the other question that I have is, to what extent can MPs, if MPs do know their role, to what extent can they act on it? Is inherently the political machine, the political enterprise, the political parties themselves, constrainers, right, in terms of if MPs acknowledge and they rightfully know their role, to what extent can they actually act on it?
Well, let's be specific. We have a member of Parliament here in Toronto on the beach. His name is Nathaniel Erskine Smith. He voted against the government over 20 times in his last term. He's still in the caucus. He was actually put in the cabinet for a short period of time by Prime Minister Carney. I think that it has to do with the individual member of Parliament deciding whether or not they want to be a slave to the lobbyists, a slave to the centre, or whether they want to do the job that their constituents elected them to do.
Dennis, when you say slave,
Slave.
okay, which is a fairly strong word, what's the motivation of that? Is it ambition? Politicians are ambitious people. They want to do good for the country. They may want to have some attention to themselves. Is it the ambition of the individual that lets them be so cognizant of the power of the party or the leader's office? And any of our panelists can.
Well, I'll tell you some of the MPs that I've talked to in the last few years, and obviously I'm so passionate about standing up and speaking in the House of Commons, it doesn't matter what the issue is. And I say, why aren't you doing it? Or why don't you stand up in caucus? Because that's where you make the centre accountable, in caucus. And they tell me that there's staffers in the caucus and that the recrimination feature against them when they speak out in a constructive way to try and improve a particular issue, the recrimination feature is not worth it, so they keep their mouths shut, which is sad.
So I think there's a couple pieces here. So one is, in 2022, I did about 25 exit interviews back to back over a period of a couple of weeks. And what came, first, I was surprised. I'm a sociologist, and my assumption was that the interviews were going to be short, scripted, and they were going to end early, and that was going to be it. They all went over time we booked 90 minutes, and they all went over time, and they were done over Zoom, because former MPs had so much to share and unload about the experience. And what started to come into relief is that there's a bell curve, right? As there is with every cohort, and everybody is smart going in. But then there's going to be stratification. Everyone's ambitious, smart, motivated, ready to make change, ready to represent their constituents and aligning with the party. Everyone has that start. But then the stratification occurs. And these are the people who have the relationships and the social capital to dissent without consequence. And then there are others who just simply don't have that. And when they dissent, they are going to face severe consequences, sometimes overt, sometimes passive aggressive. So Robert Falcon-Ouellette gives an example on Humans of the House where he's on a committee, the committee's going to do some travel, he's not going on the trip. And it's not explained why or how, but signals are sent. So then that also starts to give some we see the contours of a pretty toxic work culture where there's rules, but then there's unwritten rules. And we are naive to think it could be any other way, but we don't really see much of that unwritten rule stuff. So if there's consequences and punishments and things like that happening, we're not necessarily going to see it. We see a lot of this clipped, scripted bravado that's on CPAC or plays well on social, and that's almost sort of played out to this point. But so we're seeing this kind of narrowing on what you're going to be able to see and know of your MP. Then there's this really intense experience of how hard this culture is to learn and understand and navigate. It just really doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of exceptionalism that's woven throughout it. You're supposed to feel lucky to be there, and if you play your cards right, maybe this, maybe this, maybe this, and you're pulled in so many different directions. And then when we look at our last cohort of interviewees, so that's the 2015 to 2021 group, they have said the most, compared to any other cohort, that the PMO's way too controlling and powerful. So they've really underscored that, and this is across parties. And this frustration is directly linked to the political staff, who are frequently and disparagingly referred to as the boys and girls in short pants. And so this kind of, Arvind, you were sketching out this, strategic, kind of too clever by half, too scripted, too narrow, too concentrated, too much, and that's all people see. And then, Dennis, you're illustrating the fact that people come in really motivated and they have more power than they realize. What happens, like, when you get in there and you're totally destabilized, right? And then how do you make sense of that after the fact? Because that's kind of what comes to us in our interviews, is truly just a form of sense making of the experience. And this is for people who are a couple years out of that.
Picking up on that just for a short point. I had the privilege, the pleasure of serving under Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. I was never a minister, but I was allowed to really do stuff. And I remember one day sitting in the house with Jean, and he said to me, "Denis, you drive a couple of my ministers nuts, the way you're always trying to beat them up and ask for things." And I said, "Well, Jean, it's because they're not doing anything." And he says, "You're right, keep going, keep going." and I give you that point because leaders, prime ministers, want to see things done too. And even some of the ministers need to be motivated in doing what has to be done. And MPs can be a great source of making the executive accountable if they realize that's part of their job.
You had a point.
One thing that Sabrina mentioned, which, as we're speaking about possible drivers as to why MPs toe the line, we spoke a bit about moving up the ranks. But another thing is about possibly workplace culture. We've seen many reports, especially from women and racialized elected officials, about workplace toxicity in these kinds of spaces. And perhaps I'm wondering if this came up during any of your exit interviews. If towing the party line, it might be an obvious answer, but does towing the party line allow and support a more friendly workplace environment? Is that the answer why MPs are doing this? Just shut up, stay quiet, and everything will be happy.
I think, yes, there is plenty of commentary from former MPs, like in terms of gender, party, region, that this is a work environment that is not keeping up with other sectors and spaces in terms of modern HR policies. Sexual harassment is a rampant concern. Maternity leave, just hybrid parliament, all those kinds of pieces of, how we understand the world of work today, which has changed very rapidly. But it's also because this is a special environment, right? And because the focus on tradition and exceptionalism can be used to override making the space more functional and productive, it produces a really awkward context in which to be working in. And Tom, you said, like, what's the job description? Does everyone have the same one? And do they all sign on to that? Is that okay? It's not really there. And so I think as we look for this role to evolve and be responsive to public concerns, there has to be some clarity around how are we going to work together? What is our function and purpose? Because as things get more scripted and strategic and disconnected, the public is moving further and further away. They do not feel that that is their house. And so now we're facing the consequences of that. And it's pretty severe. And I'll just, another note is just when we asked MPs what trait is overvalued, what's undervalued, overvalued was to have blind loyalty to the party. Yeah, and undervalued was independence, which is why you stepped forward in the first place.
Good. Now we have several members of former members of Parliament and senators and a very healthy audience come out to listen to us today. So I'd like to turn it to the audience for questions or comments that you may have. Sarah will help us. Please, speaking to the mic for the online audience, but are there questions or comments that you'd like to say as our panel has evolved.
My question is...
Use the mic, David.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Just leave it.
My question is for you, Dennis, and I don't want to be disrespectful in the question at all, but the opening comments, you were identified, as opposed to the other two in the panel, as someone who is supportive of a greater centralization of the government. Am I correct in that?
The national government.
Yes, yes.
In other words, we don't want to offload immigration. We don't want to offload the departments to the provinces.
Yes, but I took your broader point that you were in favor of centralized governments in cabinets and prime ministers.
No,
and
I meant
governments.
the instruments of government.
Well, that was my question.
There's
then.
over 200 departments and agencies of the Government of Canada, and I think the Government of Canada needs a strong piece of machinery in order to look after the whole country. I didn't mean a strong PMO.
Dennis was talking about Meech Lake, which he thought
Yes,
would have decentralized the country even more than the decentralized country.
So I
we
just
have
wanted
now.
to clarify that.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
My question then is, you spoke about, I think you're a living and walking example of a politician who paid the price of speaking his mind, being a grit in the true sense of the word. Liberals were originally called grit, under the saddle, making it comfortable for the rider on the horse and so on. And you've talked about how satisfied you were with your career and so forth and so on. But the reality is, I sense, and lots of my colleagues sense, and they're very sympathetic, that you never made it into the cabinet because you would have been a very good cabinet minister. Do you think your gritness kept you out of cabinet?
No, it wasn't my gritness. I had some personal issues that I had to deal with, but I never felt because I wasn't in cabinet that I couldn't get as much done as any cabinet minister. In other words,
Oh, that's interesting.
I chose.
That's interesting.
By the way, when you talk about the job description of an MP, well, it was pretty simple for me. It was to serve my constituents. It was that simple. Listen to what they're telling me, and that's why I had a place on the Danforth where everybody could find me, see me, or my staff. I had great staff. But this is an important thing because we got a lot of MPs today that actually hide their offices. You can't find them. Okay, and try and phone an MP's office today. I defy you. There's always exceptions, but most MPs, you can't even reach them today. Okay, I mean, we had, under Tom's leadership, we had a switchboard in the PMO with 6 women, two shifts a day, and it worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if a parliamentarian wanted to call the Prime Minister's office, there was a response, or they plug them through the MP to a minister or a parliamentary secretary or whoever. That kind of that whole system has collapsed, and for me, not being in the cabinet, I didn't feel inferior because I got to do the things I love to do, serve my constituents.
But you did say, so you felt that you had the same authority as a cabinet minister in terms of that you could do the same kind of activities?
No, I couldn't. I didn't have the authority of a cabinet minister, but if I wanted. Like I remember one time Prime Minister Critchin came and said to me, I want you to chair Toronto's bid for the Olympics. And I said, because I just finished chairing a sport committee, and I said, Prime Minister, I don't want to do that. I want to be the representative on the Pope's visit to Toronto. What is that? Well, here's what it is. And Prime Minister Critchin said, you got it. And that same day, Minister Lloyd Axworthy called me in, wrote a letter, and I was in charge of the Pope's visit, 2 years of my life. And that gave me, as a member of Parliament, separate from serving my constituents, another round of satisfaction.
We have more questions, and there are some online questions. So let's take one more from the audience, and then we'll go to the online.
Thank you. I was most interested in what you have to say, but I would like to know if you are, in your research, differentiating along party lines. In other words, are the federal NDP members who have no chance at all of getting into a cabinet, at least in historical conditions, do they hold the same views as others? And I'm going to sneak in a sort of second question. You talk about Parliament, but it has 2 houses. So do you think it's the same in the Senate?
We would love to do a study on the
On the
Senate.
Senate?
Funding is an issue there, so if anyone has any answers to that question, I'm happy to chat. Yeah, the points that I've shared today, concerns about a toxic and unproductive culture of work, too much control by the leader, and also just concerns about limited modernization, those carry across parties, and those are largely flowing from the 2015 to 2021 cohort. So in Humans of the House, you hear Cheryl Hardcastle describe her complete shock at just conduct, just day-to-day hostility and heckling, particularly during question period. And she uses words like nightmare to describe this. She was also nightmare, yeah. And she also describes how younger junior women are treated in that space as well. Catherine McKenna also uses colorful language. She uses the word cage match to describe people shouting at each other. But at the same time, what Dennis just described about how you were very clear-eyed, here's the situation, how can I move through it? That was also very common. So we have had interviewees tell us, everybody was shooting for this, but I found this way to get it done. And that's true leadership, right? Is someone who doesn't just sit and wait for this perfect linear path to power, but just finds ways to make change happen and get things done. And also, not to paint such a sordid and bleak picture, people also across parties have told us how meaningful committee work is, and that this is a really important space for collaboration, camaraderie, understanding. And one of our recommendations is for there to be more properly resourced opportunities for MPs to have time together to solve problems that they're all concerned about, to just simply make collegial connections with each other. We also heard about how people have insane travel that they have to undertake to go back to their ridings and then to Ottawa. You're traveling together, you're going to become friends. And so you hear stories about that on Humans of the House as well. And it's really a shame that this isn't more visible to the public, because it would help the public understand what their representative is actually doing, and that it isn't performative, scripted nonsense on social media or kind of blind, puppets. So that is something that across all parties is viewed as really valuable, really important, and a shame that it's not more visible to the public, because that would then just reinforce that public trust element, because that gap between the public and their representatives is a concern.
Good, thanks, Sabrina. If we can see the online question, is our Westminster system of government broken? You mentioned the Westminster system, Harvard. One does not elect a government, instead one elects a representative. So this question also reflects Andrew Coyne, who thinks our system is broken. Do we think it's that serious? Is our representative system broken? Very good question, tough one. Let me throw it out to the panel.
Well, I think there's 2 sides to this, right? I think proponents of strict party discipline will say, well, that's how we get things done. Things can be sped up in a way. The government has been elected with some kind of mandate. We can debate the merits of first past the post versus other electoral systems, but one strong argument that promotes this idea of strong party discipline is we can get things done faster. Our communities and our nation needs parliamentarians to work more expeditiously and work in a way that pushes through major agenda items. Conversely, on the other hand, with a more deliberative, kind of thoughtful, measured debates in between political parties, amongst different actors, that can be a lengthy and timely process. So I think for there, one central tension that I see is the timing of which things take place. So that is one tension that I see. It's great to have deliberative dialogue, but it's potentially problems with timing could be a factor.
Other responses.
Well, I think it's important to go upstream here, and we've been grateful that Andrew Coyne has referenced our work on nominations.
Yes.
So if we think about how do people get to the role of MP in the first place, is this the person that the community has decided is the representative that they want? No, parties have really tight control across the board just in terms of, who are the nominees in the first instance. So I think, again, like that tension between the party and the public, and then how that plays out in terms of policy making and our broader understanding of how the culture of politics in Canada, that's all connected there.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said here, except I want to put more of a focus on the importance of Prime Minister Carney reinvigorating the House of Commons and committees. I am a passionate believer that when you are sitting in that House of Commons debating issues, not 72 days a year, but at least 150 days a year, a number of things happen. The most important thing that happens is the camaraderie, which you touch on. That camaraderie is critical because it spills over into the committee work as well, or back and forth. And that, especially in a crisis that we're in right now in terms of almost national unity, I think that minimizing that toxicity is a critical thing. And the way to do that is when you are working day in and day out, and long evenings, speaking, whatever, you develop a rapport, and through that rapport, that chemistry, it's almost miraculous the way things can get done.
So, just on that point, Dennis, so should our committees then elect their own chairs by secret ballot rather than it being gerrymandered by the leader?
Well, this is where I think in terms of efficiency, Canadians still elect a government, a majority government, and they expect when they elect a majority government that they sort of have the parliamentary instruments to try and get things done expeditiously. And I think that one of the hidden jewels that most Canadians never see is the whole committee process. And I think that it's important that the government, as they are in charge of the House of Commons in terms of legislation and votes, I think it's important that follows through to committee.
Mm-hmm. Other comments from colleagues on Dennis suggested one reform for the issues we've raised today. We don't have to answer them now, but I'm going to ask each of you to also think of, if there's one thing that you would do that Mr. Carney or the government or the House or the Speaker could do to fix things, what would it be? So keep that. We'll have one more question, and then we'll go back to the...
I have a question about this majority government, in the sense that what happens if a minority government evolves into a majority government without a vote taking place by the public?
You mean like the previous government?
Yeah.
Like the democratic implications of that?
Yes. Like, how do we ensure trust with the public that their understanding of the parliament may not be enough to understand that they elect a member, not a party?
Yes.
Well, you saw the results of that.
That's right.
You saw the results of that because that was essentially the Trudeau NDP coalition, so to speak. You saw the result from Canadians that the Liberals were down 25 points before Carney and Trump came along. In other words, had Trump, had Carney and his resume and Trump not come along at the same time, the Liberal Party would have been obliterated because Canadians didn't like that coalition.
Other points about the role of the Member of Parliament vis-a-vis the party. This has been raised that somehow it's illegitimate for members to cross the floor or exercise their judgment as members of Parliament as opposed to the party interest.
I think if we can just focus on the perspective of the voter for a minute, for a lot of Canadians, the act of voting feels very extractive and empty, and that the only time they hear from their party is when they need their vote, and then they're gone. Yeah. And so there are abundant tools and approaches that are participatory and deliberative, where citizens can be engaged in the political process beyond just an election. And it doesn't, for Canadians, it's not even about actually getting the change that they want to see, but just feeling that they were included, heard, that there is some responsiveness from their elected officials. So I think if there's more of that, plus a concerted effort on civic education in Canada that is multi-generational, that it's not just something that, oh, I didn't learn it in grade 10, so now I'm a terrible person, which is a sense that a lot of voters have in Canada. They feel intimidated and ashamed when it comes to being active politically. So those are some ways that I think that would make a meaningful difference and enhance public understanding of what their expectations should be.
Very briefly, the democratic theory part of me would love to say, well, we elect the individual, right? The individual that I put my trust as a voter in my elected representative, whatever they do, right? We don't have recalls, but whatever they do, I trust that they can traverse cross-party floors, whatever the case might be. But we do know that typically when voters elect an elected official, it's by party affiliation. That's a primary thing that comes to mind.
And leader.
And leader, of course, that's the most important thing.
For most of Canadian history, the party affiliation was not on the ballot. It's only been in recent years that we've put the party on the ballot. One last point or comment from the only minister in the crowd, and then we'll.
Well, I would be.
Mike,
oh, sorry.
you have to guide these ministers.
I would be remiss if I didn't compliment you, Dennis, on your thoughts about the committee structure and how it should work. Ideally, and the rewards of sitting on. I sat in cabinet for almost 6 years, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. But there was a different kind of camaraderie, or different kind of ethos at the cabinet table, and in many ways, I preferred the committee. I sat in committees. I chaired a couple of committees, because the committee structure forced me, as a member or as the chair, I had to work with or negotiate with. In the Ontario case, 3 political parties, and that sort of never really happened in the House itself. There was a camaraderie at the cabinet, but it was sort of friends with the same ideology, if you will. It's a different thing to work with other parliamentarians of a different ideology. So I compliment you on your advice on that.
So as we're coming to the end of our session, I began by referencing the history of Canada in fighting for responsible government, the Baldwins and LaFontaines and the Joseph Howes. So if any of those worthies came back today, would they say in our Canadian Parliament and government that we have responsible government?
Looking at this from a comparative perspective, I would say no, because Canada obviously ranks very high, extremely high in terms of partisan affinity and towing the party line. I think 2 solutions that I would like to see, potentially drawing on cases from other jurisdictions, is the formation of something like the 1922 Committee in the United Kingdom, so empowering backbencher MPs to come together, to have more stronger deliberation, active dialogue, and actually government MPs, backbencher MPs, holding the government to account. I feel like that's such a missing puzzle. And my second recommendation would be around having an opposition day committee. I mean, these kinds of things happen in other jurisdictions. Right now, it's decided by random ballot, right? Which matters appear before the table in terms of opposition day business. But I think those are 2 pressing items that I think are tangible and I would like to see happen.
There's room for improvement, and it's a waste that all of these capable people are not being better engaged in the work of governing. And one recommendation that the Samara Centre has had is to create a kind of parallel debating chamber where there can be substantive parliamentary debate on issues that matter to Canadians. This is something that would be responsive to petitions from Canadians. It would relate to issues that other MPs all care about together, and I mentioned this before, but to fund it properly as well. And that this isn't something that is influenced by party whips, and that priority is given to issues with cross-party support. This is a way to demonstrate responsiveness to the public, which can strengthen our democracy, and this can also enable the culture reset that we're looking for as well, so that we can harness what's good and productive in those committees and make that the norm, and to increase that.
Dennis, you've already mentioned strengthening the committee system, but one other idea. Since
Well, on execution,
yeah.
how could we build the CP rail coast to coast in 5 years, and we can't build a roadway to $1 trillion worth of critical minerals, which is 400 kilometers? I just think we should all these MPs should be put in that there should be a committee that devoted to say, how could 100 years ago they achieve that in 5 years, and today we can't even get on first base?
Good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I want to thank the panel for an excellent discussion, and thank you for attending, and thanks for our online audience tuning in. Obviously, we meet in a time where democracies are under huge pressures in many places, but Canadians shouldn't fool themselves. We have issues here too. And the role of Parliament in keeping our government accountable, the response of our government toward the representation, voices of the people, this is the essence of democracy. So thank you for joining in Massey College's attempt at continuing public education on this issue. And our next series in our ethics series is the role of religion in Canadian politics. And that's in February with my co-chair, Don Gibson. So thank you very much.